So I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say that Streets of Tarkov has been the most anticipated single piece of content that Escape from Tarkov has ever offered. The community has been waiting, sometimes patiently, and sometimes not so patiently, for years, to finally set foot on the streets of Tarkov. We've been basically everywhere else there is to go in Tarkov, from the coast to the deep forests, and even some areas right on the outskirts of the city. But until about 3 weeks ago, the inner city of Tarkov was just a fable. Just something we dreamed about while sleeping soundly in our hideouts. After years of waiting, dreaming, and speculating on vague bits of information that were often lost in translation, I think a lot of people had a lot of different ideas about what Streets would be like, what we would find there, and what we were actually going to get after it was finally announced that we would get our first chance to set foot on Streets in the 0.13 update. Some people expected this to be the patch to end all patches, the glorious rise of the phoenix from the ashes, brighter and stronger than ever before. Others were convinced that we would get 3 buildings and a back alley, and the hype for Streets would drift away like a plastic bag in the wind. Some people assume that Streets, the flagship location of Tarkov, the actual city the game is named after, was going to be the pinnacle of Tarkov's evolution. Some theorizing that it surely had to be running on some mythical, fine-tuned technology that would showcase what BSG is really capable of when they put their all into something. Meanwhile, others assumed it was going to be a literal slideshow of single-digit frames and even worse renditions of the classic Tarkov problems. The truth, I think, is somewhere in the middle, as it usually is. Streets of Tarkov is, I think, both the most interesting map in Tarkov right now, and a shining example of some of the worst problems Tarkov has. And that's basically what I want to talk about in this video. How Streets of Tarkov exemplifies some of the best and worst things about Tarkov. It's another example of how BSG can impress us with their ambition and the scope of their ideas, while also kind of killing their own momentum in the same moment, by rushing things out to us with severe issues that don't just hinder the experience, but for a lot of people, kind of downright ruin it. For my part, the more I play Streets of Tarkov, the more I unironically do have faith that this location is going to be a landmark of video game map and environmental design. And exploring this map is eventually going to be the single best thing about playing Escape from Tarkov. We've only gained access to a small slice of the Streets of Tarkov, or at least that's what the developers tell us. And already, I'm pretty mesmerized by the vibes, the aesthetics, and the intricacies of this map, even in its early stages as basically a demo of the full level. I would say that all of Tarkov's maps have some pretty phenomenal environmental design, especially as someone who really enjoys immersion when it comes to map design. I like to feel that a location I'm exploring is a real place, and Tarkov nails a lot of little things like the scale of the environments and the placing of props and clutter everywhere you look. The density of little details in Tarkov is amazing, and these small details are part of what gives Tarkov this distinct, eerie, almost haunting vibe that makes many of the environments stand out. The level of detail and realness that is at the heart of many of Tarkov's maps is almost uncanny sometimes. You're not just in another empty room with no furniture like in PUBG, or another copy-pasted house with the same props like in Warzone. Every time you turn a corner in a building, you're greeted with some new and often grim or gruesome sight. Streets of Tarkov really nails it in this respect, and from an aesthetic and immersion standpoint, I think this map definitely meets the expectations that I had set for it in my own head. Whether that holds true for you is kind of a personal matter, but I think it's hard to argue that Streets isn't one of the most detailed urban environments we've ever seen in an FPS game. The scale of the location is kind of perfect. The buildings tower over you on every side, and the open streets and courtyards provide a really stark contrast to the narrow mazes of corridors and small rooms in most of the buildings. Back alleys are overgrown with shrubbery and littered with rubbish. Wrecked smoking vehicles and the rubble of buildings hit with tank shells are scattered around everywhere, and the remains of those poor unfortunate souls who were never destined to escape from Tarkov serve as a grim reminder that your safety is anything but certain. I end up comparing everything to Dark Souls, but quite honestly, the design of environments in Tarkov really reminds me of how Dark Souls always manages to have this contrast between the former beauty and serenity of its world in the past and the current, much more dark and gruesome present state of things. Sometimes you look around in Tarkov and think to yourself, damn, this would be a nice place to visit. And then around the next corner, you're snapped back to reality by a sight that shows you the true depravity of a world post-collapse. Now, of course, this type of map design doesn't come without its own flaws. Designing game environments to mirror real places brings a lot of immersion, but it also tends to ignore some things more integral to making a good game, most notably map balance. Bad spawns are a Tarkov meme as old as Tarkov itself. I can remember literally my first ever Tarkov raid on customs, getting spawn killed by someone who knew I would be there and knew exactly how to get an angle on me. On some maps, the issue is way worse than others, but in general, because these maps are designed to be realistic and not play like a typical FPS map, sometimes map geography can be more of a curse than a blessing. Streets is kind of chaotic off spawn. There are several spawn points that basically start trapped in a corner, with nowhere to push except forward into the waiting arms of the PMC squad who can just post up on some cover and mow you down. There's also the classic loot bias for a lot of spawns, where you basically start the raid so much closer to the best loot than every other player, that you basically have free reign over the best items on the map. This I would say is less of an issue on streets because there's a lot of really good loot hotspots all over the place, but it's still a thing. Now for my part, I do believe that this is largely a temporary issue. This is the first part of Streets of Tarkov to be released, and it will certainly be expanded. Spawns that are trapped in a corner now will have new ways to maneuver as the map gets bigger, just like old customs. Even better loot hotspots will be created in new buildings in areas we haven't even been yet. The chaos off spawn will likely get quieter as the map grows and players get more spread out. That being said, we have no way of knowing when any of this might happen. It could be in a few months, it could be over a year. So it's hard to take comfort in that idea. Sure, it's great that spawns might get better once we get an expansion, but when will that be? Who knows? Now I know for a fact, to many Tarkov players, the design and look and feel of the map is kind of a secondary concern to the oldest struggle in Tarkov history, getting the game to run well on your individual computer. And that brings me to the least optimistic part of my Streets of Tarkov discussion: performance, or the lack thereof upon this first launch. Tarkov is a hard game to run well, just in general. I've played Tarkov on a laptop with a 950M graphics card, a mid-range PC with a 2060 and a fairly old i7, and now I'm playing Tarkov on a pretty beastly machine with a 12GB 3080 graphics card and a 12700K CPU. And let me tell you, sometimes it still feels like I'm playing on that old laptop. Maybe the worst part about the game's performance is how inconsistent it is, with so much variation based on what map and server you're on at any given time. Tarkov is among the only games that I've ever played where a lot of people actually choose not to play a significant part of the content simply because they don't want to compromise their game performance. Streets is maybe the ultimate example of this. Sure, Lighthouse was and still does run pretty poorly, but the consistent rubber banding, disconnections, invisible scavs, and players, combined with low frames and stutters, can really deflate the whole experience for a lot of people. And this is kind of made worse by the fact that we came in so hyped to finally explore Streets of Tarkov after years of teasing it. Our expectations were sky high, so it was even more crushing when we finally started our first raid, couldn't leave spawn because we rubber banded all over the place, and then got shot by an invisible sniper scav. On top of this, shipping Streets in the first major update that contained a new audio system that also isn't anywhere near complete or functional doesn't really help a lot of things either. This isn't really specific to Streets of Tarkov, but it does most definitely color our first impressions of this map with an ugly gray brushstroke. Ultimately, I'm still legitimately enjoying exploring Streets of Tarkov very much, despite the issues. This environment is so different compared to almost all of the other areas we have to play, and I find exploring it, interacting with it, and fighting within it is just incredibly fun. There is so many layers to this map, even in the early stages. The level of verticality isn't what I expected, but that could come in time. It feels like many of these individual areas, like the Pinewood Hotel, the Lexus dealership, and the Concordia Apartments, could be their own map all by themselves, and having them all at play at once like this is just really cool. Sometimes I have gotten pretty frustrated by dying on Streets over and over again, but I've also come to really appreciate finally having a new area in Tarkov that makes me feel lost, scared, alone, and like I'm fighting against all the odds just to survive. That's what hooked me on Tarkov in the first place, and the more I learn the map, the more excited I get for it to grow and to see what lies deeper into the city and to see where it all started. To sum this all up, Streets of Tarkov, like many other things about this game, is a flawed yet beautiful addition to Escape from Tarkov. It's both exactly what I wanted and exactly what I hoped it wouldn't be. And that's really all I have to say here in this one. So let me know what you think down in the comments. Does the good outweigh the bad when it comes to Streets? Are you one of the people who simply can't play it even if you wanted to? What have been some of your highlights so far from exploring Streets of Tarkov? Thanks for watching this video. I've got links to my Twitch stream and Discord server down below for anyone interested. And until next time, stay safe out there on the streets of Tarkov.